All right, so I just woke up from a nap and realized, shit, I have not made a review for the Red Rising Trilogy. Just the first three books, I just finished reading them in the past 2 weeks. I have been talking about them on TikTok in like shorter form videos, but I just wanted to talk about the whole trilogy overall today. So I'm gonna try to make things so that I don't spoil too much. I'll try to be very generic and vague about things in case you guys haven't read the books. But if you guys want to know just quickly if you guys should read it or not, do read them. But please watch this video too, because I really need the views. But yeah, you guys should definitely read the series. It's fast-paced, action-packed, great characters, breakneck pacing, really fun and easygoing writing. But yeah, I'm gonna go over the categories I guess I think about when I'm reading books. And the 5 categories are concept, which I would say is basically like the backstory or like the setup, the world as a whole, plot, so just the actual literal plot of the story, characters, themes, and finally writing, which is like pacing and just if the writing was easy to follow or like poetic. Yeah, let's just jump into the first category, concept. So what is the concept of this story overall? The basic premise, or like the world is, it's a futuristic world. I think it's, I don't know, like 100 or 1,000 years. It doesn't matter. I mean, but it's a sci-fi story set in the future. There's the background of like the color hierarchy where like the golds are at the top and the reds are at the bottom. And everything in between. There's many other colors that are every person specialized in like specific things for all their for the color they're born into. But yeah, so that's like the basic premise, and then we have like basically Darrow, the main character, leading essentially a rebellion from the lowest class against the highest class. So I will say this. This is the kind of story in terms of like concept where the concept it might not be the most engaging or interesting. If the way I make it sounds like a fairly generic story, and I don't think it is. I think it starts off fairly derivative, but then it evolves as it goes along. But in terms of like the concept itself, I would say that's probably the weakest part. The colors hierarchy is very obvious about like classism. So if you have a problem with things being very obvious about like, oh yeah, there's the colors and the high class gold and they're like, I don't know, like blonde, like cute, like a pale skin, like it's very like obvious what like Pierce Brown is going for with that. But I still think as it goes along, when you add more and more of the sci-fi stuff, because in the first book it reads very much like Hunger Games in the beginning, very much like YA, and then but then once you get to the second and third book, you start to see more of the world. You start to learn more about the different colors. So then like the world becomes bigger, it becomes more interesting, and I think that's where it starts to shine, starting from the second book onward, when we start to hear more about all the different colors. Because in the beginning it's kind of just like red bottom, gold top, that's it. But then as we go along, no, we get to find out more about the different colors in the second and third book. But yeah, it's it starts out fairly generic and then it evolves. So I think the concept is very good. By the end, I was really enjoying it. Oh, and yeah, another thing I should mention is there's a very obvious influence of like Roman culture. Like if you watch shows like Spartacus or like movies like Gladiator, a lot of the speech, the like language that they use, this like high royal language, especially from the golds, is very clear, inspired by that kind of like talk. They use like the word good man, oh my good man, or whatever, gory damn, I don't know. Like I always, when I hear characters like in my head when I'm reading, when I think about how they speak, I'm thinking about like how we would think about a stereotypical Roman like gods, or like Greek gods in like mythology. That's how I imagine characters like Cassius. But yeah, it's very Roman influence and inspired, but then there's like that sci-fi edge to it. So the story, there is some like interesting like contrast. I don't think I know many stories that have that kind of like um those, like that merging of these two sides. So yeah, I mean, overall the concept not the strongest, but as it goes along, it gets much better and it gets more interesting. Then as for the plot of the story, I think overall the plot is very good. As I said, with the concept side, starts off fairly generic, very Hunger Games. I would say Lord of the Flies, very Lord of the Flies, especially in the second half of the first book. But then when we get to like the second book, it's becomes, I don't know, becomes like a mix of like Attack on Titan, Game of Thrones, Star Wars. Like it becomes more like war, political machinations, like a lot of twists. If you are a fiend for stories with like a lot of twists and things that you can predict, but other things that you can't predict, this story's for you. There's so many twists, especially in the second and then the third book as well. And there's so many. This is another thing that might be a con, a plus, or a negative, depending on the kind of reader you are. If you love stories like Sherlock Holmes, the BBC show with Benedict Cumberbatch, or the movies, or if you like maybe stuff like Inception, stories where there's like characters are like coming up with plans upon plans and like scheming, and then there's like a backstab, but then it's like, oh, I predicted that, but it's like, oh no, actually you did not, and then I have another backstab on top of that. Like if you, it's like JoJo's Bizarre Adventure, if you ever watch it, where there's like characters that are like, I wanted you to trap me in this specific location and do this to me. This actually was part of my plan all along. Second and third book especially delve into that territory almost to a ridiculous level. But while you're reading it, while I'm reading it, I'm buying into it. I'm having fun, so I did not mind it. But yeah, the plot is really fun, really action packed. A lot of violence, a lot of like emotional moments between characters that I'll delve into when I talk about them specifically. But yeah, and a lot of space warfare, especially in the second and third book. I can't imagine the concept of I think they call it the Iron Rain, which is like when Golds invade like a planet, they'll shoot people down in like, I guess like suits, and then they'll land on planets like asteroids crashing in. And I can imagine like that so vividly when it's being described, and like those plot elements are just so cool and so fun. There's so many moments in the story that like there's so many twists where you'll just gasp and be like, what the heck, and you'll just want to keep reading. And there's also so many moments where like the action is, and there's like very unique moments of like being stuck in situations in this like an action packed scene, and it's like, how is Darrow or how are the other characters gonna get out of it? And it's always fun, it's always entertaining. It might not be for everyone, but you will finish these books, guaranteed. If you're in a reading slump, you will finish these books. I can assure you that. So yeah, now moving on to characters. This is the strongest part of the story, bar none, in my opinion. Characters, Pierce Brown, and I hate to keep repeating myself, but and I guess I should clarify. The first book is the weakest of the three. The second, in my opinion, it goes one. The first one is the worst, which is still really good. Second one is in the middle, and then the third one is my favorite one. I feel like most people say the second one is their favorite, and I understand why, because the second one is so frenetic in its pace, and you just want to keep reading, and they're like, it feels like there's a cliffhanger on every single chapter where you just have to keep going, and I understand. But for me, third one was just a perfect bookend to the story as a whole. Going back to what I was going to talk about, characters. So characters, the best part of these books. They are so well written. Even the bad guys, you hate them, but you hate them. You don't in some cases with some characters, you don't understand how they can be this horrible, but you respect it. You know, you love to hate them, I guess is what I should say. Specifically with one character in the story, I guess I'll mention him, the Jackal. What a great character. He's like top tier villain. Love to hate him. But yeah, as for aside from the Jackal, there's many other great villains, I guess, in the story that you understand where they come from. Their background really informs the people they are, as do all the characters in the story, obviously. But the main characters, the heroes of the story, are so well written. Darrow is such a good character. He is headstrong in the beginning. His progression through it, as like this red, and then a red that works in a mine, and then what goes on in the story later on is so good, and it's so heartfelt. The moments he has with a lot of characters and the decisions he has to make. He is not a good guy, and it's very, if you really think about his actions throughout the three books, you could very easily write another book where you make him look out to seem like a war criminal, to be like this horrible person. And I really love that, because it reminds me a lot to Paul Atreides' journey in Dune. It very much a kind of like, yeah, he's put into this position. He doesn't have any experience with any of this stuff. He's learning as he's going, and he has to make these brutal decisions that will cost millions of people their lives sometimes. But he and in the book, obviously, you feel like, oh, he's always making the right decision, but is he really? Because he gains a lot of enemies along the way. He he does things that will definitely come to bite him later on, and I'm sure they will in the next four books in the series. But even in these three, there's many characters that, like, you understand why they hate him, by later on in the story. You see why they're justified in the way they feel towards him. But besides Darrow, my favorite character by far, and I don't think this is a surprise, most people probably feel the same way, Severo's my favorite character. He's great, he's fantastic. I need a wolfskin cover. It's funny enough that I'm wearing a Berserk shirt, and Guts, there's a lot of like the I guess his shadow, if you've read the manga, is like the wolf. So hey, maybe Guts, Severo there, but maybe Piers Brown got some influence from Berserk as well. Wouldn't be surprised. I feel like Piers Brown definitely has got an influence from more modern stories, as well as like Dune and like other obvious influences in the past. But Severo, my favorite character. His background is amazing. With like I'm not gonna talk too much about that stuff, but his background amazing. His banter is hilarious. He is such a funny character. He brings so much levity, but at the same time, he is ruthless, and he will kill you in a second if he can't trust you. So loved him. Love the Mustang. She comes off as like the good in the world, and the light in in the darkness of that not just Darrow, but the enemies from the other side also like bring into this world. She is great. Victra later on in books 2 and 3, she is also so good, and I love the journey she has and the relationships. I always love in books when, and I think Pierce Brown gets this, and I think a lot of manga and anime shows like One Piece or mangas like One Piece, they do a good job of this. After big battles, you have to have these moments of levity where characters are just shooting the shit, just having banter, you know? And there's a lot of that in especially book 3, moments where we can just sit and breathe and have good times, you know, and remember and remind ourselves why we're invested in the story and in these characters. So I love the characters. Their journeys are so hard. They make mistakes. They fuck up all the time. They make new enemies, but they learn. And their Several's journey, Daryl's journey, they're so believable. And you understand the decisions they make. They just feel like three dimensional characters completely. Next, let's talk about themes and I guess thought provokingness as a whole. I would say this book, for having like this frenetic action packed story with like a lot of like cliffhangers, drama. It does have a lot to say. It does. I don't think it also gives you any clear answers. You kind of have to make up your mind about what Pierce Brown is trying to say in this story. There are some specific themes or specific phrases that are used that might guide you a specific way. For example, a phrase that's used all the time, like especially by book 3, is death begets death begets death. And yeah, I mean, there's a lot of at least in my head, the things that come to mind when I'm thinking about the series is the value of trust in people. When is it worth it to trust others? And and not just because you think they'll betray you, but but even if they betray you, was it worthwhile to put that trust into them because you at least believed that they could be better than their ancestors? There's a lot, obviously, of talk about, given the goal that to Red hierarchy, can we be better than our parents and our grandparents? Like, can we change as human beings even if we're taught a specific way of living and a specific way of viewing others? Can we really change? And can we really coexist in society even if we are essentially all different in very obvious ways, I guess, in this world? But yeah, I think the main thing Daryl goes through in this journey is this idea about like trusting others, knowing when to make the hard choice, and taking out potential threats or future threats, even if it costs lives because at the end of the day, we're fighting, like he's fighting a war and he has to make these hard decisions. So it really, you could really discuss a lot about Daryl's actions, especially some pretty dramatic actions he takes on the third book. That I could see a lot of people arguing maybe this was not the right idea, the right way to go about it. Maybe it was. So it really talks. There's a lot of thoughts about leadership, a lot of talk about how to be a good leader. Should you use fear to lead? Should you use hope and like a message to lead? And obviously, I mean, Daryl goes with hope for the most part, but there's still, the decisions he makes sometimes are very cold and calculated and might bring fear to others. So surprisingly, there's a lot to discuss in this book and a lot to think about with all the characters and their journeys. Finally, I'm going to talk about the writing in the book. So it's very obvious. First book, I will say the writing, it didn't really hook me in the beginning. It took me around 100 pages. Once the story changed into Hunger Games and Lord of the Flies, that's when I was grabbed. And hey, maybe it's because I haven't read a lot of YA in general. The two things I'm talking about are literally like it, and I've watched a Maze Runner movie. I have not consumed a lot of YA, so I could see people that have consumed a lot of YA to be like, oh, here we go again. This is very obviously influenced by like battle royale and like those kinds of stories. But um, as a person that hasn't consumed a lot of it, I really enjoyed it. I thought it was fun. I thought that it was kind of like a trick, and it's like once we, especially by the second book, it's like we've thrown all that aside and we're into full like space war epic like political intrigue, and no longer in kind of like Fortnite battle royale territory. But yeah, the writing, I'd say it gets better as the series goes along. The It's kind of hard because in the beginning I was kind of cringing at some of the lines, some of the things Daryl would tell himself to make himself like, look like this big, strong 16-year-old, I guess. But I started buying into it, and I buy like the second half, the more like grandiose and over the top uh, dialogue, and like the phrasing, the first person like commentary that Daryl gives. I was hooked into it, and I was like, yeah, I was more hooked into like this hyper macho, like I have to make the bold choices, and I'm like half dead, but I'm still fast enough to kill this man, and they don't know pain like I do. I don't know. A lot of Daryl's writing, his mindset reminds me a lot of Eren from Attack on Titan. Eren, very much a troubled character, with like an edgelord's dream. Honestly, Daryl's not as bad, and actually, as the series goes along, it's toned down a bit, in my opinion. From the Especially compared to the first book, he kind of tones a lot of that down. But yeah, I think the writing, Pierce Brown, it does a really good job. The story is clear. His depiction, as I said earlier on in the plot section of the Iron Rain, is really cool. There's a really cool description of a mud scene of being stuck in the mud that is really awesome. The the dialogue is sharp, it's witty, it's really funny with specific characters. As I said earlier, they all kind of speak like they're Roman, like in Spartacus, and it adds on to the grandioseness and of the story, and like how you're supposed to see these characters as these like they're doing this for glory and pride. So the writing, honestly, really good, really approachable, and it won't be it's not one of the series where you keep going back to reread something to make sure you understood it right. That happens to me a lot, especially with older literature. That won't be a problem here. You'll get it for the most part, and you'll understand the setting, background, and the story will be moving, especially in the second book, at breakneck speeds. By like first, it's interesting because like in the first book, I would say the first 100 pages were the weakest, and then it just went along, especially the last third of the book. I just was eating it up. Second book, I would say that gets even better. I'll say also again the first like 100 pages of the book, I was like, but then there's a specific moment where there's like this big scene that happens, and then I could not stop reading, and I just ate it up in like 2 days or something. I was just like, I just wanted to keep going. And then in the third book, interestingly enough, the first 100 pages are really good. I was hooked into it, hooked into what was going on. Really liked the depiction of the mindset of Darrow in the story and what was going on. But then in the like second third of the book, like the middle of the book, it kind of slowed down and went into some places where I was like it wasn't bad, but I was not expecting it, and like I kind of was losing a little bit of interest. But then it hooked me again on the like last third, and I was just fully in again, and I couldn't stop reading. So interesting, like the pacing of the book as a whole, of the three books as a whole, but overall, really enjoyable experience. I highly recommend these books to you guys, and if you guys have read them, Let me know in the comments down below what you think about them. What's your favorite book out of the three? I can't imagine anyone saying the first one is, but who knows? I mean, if it is, please let me know why. But yeah, who are your favorite characters in the story? I forgot to talk about Cassius. Sorry. He just went by my mind, but I talked about the characters I liked the most. And forgot to talk about Ragna. Oops. But yeah, who are your guys' favorite characters in the story? If you guys didn't like the book, let me know why. Let me know why don't you like the series? I could see if you've read a lot of. I just started reading, just period. I guess I was gonna say like fantasy or sci-fi, but just in general, I started getting more to reading recently. So these books are really a good intro, but I could see if you're more like further along into fantasy and sci-fi, maybe you're past this kind of story. But yeah, let me know in the comments down below. Also, let me know what you guys think about the video. Let me know what I could change. And thank you so much for watching. Bye.